today's topic is all about the future of work, and this has been coming for a long time. Before I jump into the many questions, because I really want to get stuck into it, but so the audience and the panel know who you guys are, let's just do a quick elevator around, just so you can introduce yourselves and what you do. So we'll start with the rose amongst the thorns. Annette, would you like to start?
Sure. So I'm Annette. I'm founder of FlexiForce, and I've been very immersed in this future of workspace for the last 5 years, which essentially started when I I sold my previous business and stepped out of corporate and hung up my pencil skirt and high heels for bikinis and flip-flops and embraced a whole new way of living, traveling, and immersing myself in the digital nomadic lifestyle and all the technologies that essentially enable the gig environment.
Awesome. Thank you. Were you those looked like you about to say more? Did you want to carry on?
I was, but I think that's enough.
Okay, we'll come back. We'll definitely be unpacking the many things, because I know that you've been playing in the space for a while and you've kind of seen this future of work coming for a while. Right, let's go over to Sean. Friedrich, do you want to just jump in and just tell everyone who you are?
Thanks, Patrick. So director at Cube Workspace, based out of Cape Town. I suppose we find ourselves somewhere between Annette's FlexiForce work from anywhere environment and your old school traditional fixed office space. So we're trying to find a middle ground for people to work, operate from in an easy and convenient way.
Awesome, thanks Sean. Rajiv from Founders Factory, do you want to just tell a bit about what you guys do, the amazing work you guys do?
Great, thanks Patrick, and hi to everyone else. So I had the investment team at Founders Factory Africa. We build and scale the next generation of exciting tech startups across the continent. So I look after the business in terms of investment, fundraising for the portfolio. Not too dissimilar. I hung up my suits and ties from my background in investment banking and development finance to work in the more exciting tech space. So we're based in Johannesburg, we're Pan-African, and we're excited to be building some of the companies that are going to benefit from the new ways of working.
Awesome. And last and definitely not least, we have Vincent, who's no stranger to the AfricArena webinar panel discussions. Vincent, welcome back. Do you want to just introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, and hi everyone. Happy to be here, also remotely this year. So I'm Vincent, yes, I'm the head of partnerships and startups at Vivetech. Vivetech is actually the biggest tech event and startup event in Europe, based in Paris. Last edition was June 2019, and we are now preparing 2021 with, of course, a great focus on the subject of today, future of work.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for the quick intro. So I think let's get stuck into it, because I think each of you have invested a lot of money into this kind of general subject, the future of work. And Vincent, if we'll stick with you, I mean, we've seen this coming for a while. Remote working is not something that's new. It's been something that's been on the radar for many, many years. Many businesses started to adapt it, a couple of years ago. COVID has obviously come along and just accelerated that at an exponential pace. Where do we think it's going to settle?
Well, that's an interesting question to begin. Just before the panel, just to prepare it, I was looking at the figures here in France, just to give you a hint. It's been, the remote work has been multiplied by 5 during the crisis. And I was looking at the figures. It's interesting for you guys to have this European-centric vision, because it was not that developed in Europe, and especially in France. Remote work was not like culturally really developed here. So it was only 9 to 10%, and now we are almost 50% people working remotely. So it's Copernican revolution, you see what I mean. Of course, I'm pretty sure that we can see 2 things regarding your question. First, if COVID is a long run and not only a short run story, and it seems that it appears that it's a bit of the question, it will be also widely and on the long run developed as well. But the second thing, which is I think more important, is that it's not only about remote, but it's also, and I'm sure we will discuss about that, it's also about how we work really, because it changes almost everything. And I think that to have different visions coming from different continents maybe can be really interesting regarding that discussion.
Awesome. Yeah, it's different. It's interesting that I wonder, I was thinking while you were chatting, why Paris or France specifically has quite a low rate, or why it was so poorly adopted before. And maybe it was a cultural thing, maybe it's a control thing. You know, being such a forward-thinking city, you would think it would be more. But that's super interesting. And thanks for reaching out on those stats. And Nate, I want to come to you because obviously, you know, you've been in this game for quite a while. I know your company pivoted not so many years ago, and now you're focused primarily on aiding organizations pay freelancers, remote workers across the globe. What have you noticed that companies are looking for? And I just saw today that Twitter announced that they've let all of their employees work from home forever. So now that's kind of like a standard, and a lot of organizations are doing the same thing. But then again, you've got places like Google who are investing in buying more property in the centers of towns, you know, so that people can kind of choose. So I think there's definitely a mix. What are you noticing with your clients, and what kind of things have you picked up in your years of playing in the space?
Yeah, I think one of the big words that has kind of what I certainly believe in and am advocating for in the workspace is flexibility. And if you look at sort of the underlying principles around flexibility, one of the big meanings that underpins it is freedom. And freedom is defined by having a choice. So, sorry, I know I'm going a long route, but I have a point here. And the point is that if you have the freedom to choose, that's exactly what people want. So it's not about saying now everyone has to work remote or now everyone has to work from the office. You know, a lot of people have happened to embrace remote working through COVID, but that was a very forced remote working environment, and often with toddlers in the background and very sensitive situations and family under distress. So it's not really the true representation of remote working. You know, one of the benefits of remote working is actually being able to travel and working from beautiful places and you know, enjoying different adventures in life. So I'm hoping what COVID has brought about is the knowledge or the trust from bigger corporations that it's possible, that you can give people freedom and that they can exercise that right to choose. And then from the office space perspective, I can't take credit for this, but Richard Mulholland said in one of our early lockdown webinars that I participated in that the office of the future is going to be like a clubhouse. And I really like this analogy because one of the other things I see people have started to learn is that they can be very productive at home, but they still miss human interaction. And there are certain things that is very difficult to do remotely. But then that is why we have this office space, which is like a clubhouse where you can get together, you know, engage, you can brainstorm, you can sign deals. So I really like that analogy. And I think there's a lot of merit in having still a common space for people to get together, which is, I'm sure, what you're also seeing in the co-working space. But then at the same time, giving them the option to work from home when it's more convenient for them, ultimately all with one goal in mind, to be more productive.
Totally. And I think, you know, I think the funny thing is that like a lot of, and Vince on this may be paying on the kind of like why maybe Paris or France is taking a bit longer, is that, you know, business owners maybe have a little bit of a fear or anxiety about productivity. If I may, and guys, please may I ask, like if you've got something to add to anyone's answer, please feel free to jump in or just say, hey, you know, I'd love it to just be an open discussion as opposed to me paying traffic manager here. Sean, what I wanted to, just picking up what Annette said around freedom, and how's your strategy at Cube changed pre-COVID and post-COVID?
Well, I think a lot of what Annette has said rings very true for us. And I love the concept that you mentioned there of work becoming somewhat of a clubhouse. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of our client base, it's mixed. So we have smaller clients who financially have found it very difficult to keep an office. And we have bigger clients who, through COVID, have been forced to become educated as to other ways of conducting their business. And to your point, not have sort of a draconian measure where you have a big boss leaning over your shoulder, making sure you're being productive, and getting that output there. And I think the dream has always been that you can be output-based and success-based as opposed to the number of hours you put in a day. So I think ultimately what we're seeing in our business is a slow move to a hybrid model, which is fantastic. And it speaks to the concept of a clubhouse, where I think that there are certainly certain things that you can't do without. And it sounds silly to say human interaction, but that's who we are as a species. We're a community-based, we need that interaction with people. And what I found specifically within my own business and my staff is that all of a sudden working remotely, those relationships that we once had, where you would have a coffee and chat about each other's families and what's going on and extramural activities, etc., disappeared completely. And the conversations we were having became completely about work. And I would only speak to them if I had something that I needed from a work perspective. So it showed you the shortcomings that if we're going to all work remotely, there needs to be a measure by which we can still interact and communicate with each other on a more deep and meaningful level, because it's those relationships that actually hold the fibers together that make people ultimately committed. So if you're not committed to an organization or a brand or an ethos, you will find yourself sitting at home, twiddling your thumbs, being unproductive. Yet if you're able to come together and work together and have a common goal in mind, then being at home and achieving that goal is no different than coming to work 8 hours a day.
Totally. I think it's so important. We play a lot also in the employee experience space, and what you mentioned around that need for engagement, connection, bond building, fostering relationships. I think, I think all businesses and organizations are going to have to try balance, whether it's saying you got to be in the clubhouse 3 times a week or twice a week, just so that fosters that kind of engagement. I wanted to ask you, Rajiv, is what have you noticed this, how's it changed and developed in the startup space? Obviously startups traditionally want to keep their teams quite close because of that camaraderie, that, it's all hands on deck, everyone's doing, everything. But now all of a sudden you can access talent from across the continent, across the world. What have you picked up in just your years at Founders Factory, and what have you seen changing quite imminently that's kind of excited you or interested you?
Yeah, I think very much aligned with what we've heard so far, which is there's the theory, and then there's what's evolved or what's happened in practice. So I think initially there was that sort of novelty of, well, I've got more flexibility and I can manage my time a bit better. But I think we found a very similar trend that's developed over time, is that your relationships with your colleagues become a lot more transactional, and it makes it quite difficult to collaborate. And so, technology-wise, we've been blessed because most of our services are delivered remotely anyway. We've got most of our startups are all over the continent. But I think that internal inability to collaborate as effectively has definitely peaked over the last couple of months. I think it's also important, having this discussion, we've sort of dropped, future of work, and we've kind of jumped straight into remote work. And it sort of sounds like we're referring to a very specific subset of the global working population. So, I always find it helpful in these discussions to take some time to sort of contextualize what we're referring to, because it sounds like this is very much a subset of the service sector who are in the fortunate minority to be able to collaborate remotely through the use of technology anyway, right? But there's a majority of workers in the global population, and especially if you're looking at the African context, who this conversation is a lot more nuanced around, right?
It's a very valid point, actually. I mean, I think by proxy, we all just kind of think, exactly to your point, like, the guys who have the ability and the privilege of being able to work remotely, or, being in the service or product space that can do that. I mean, what have you got?
If I can say a word, Patrick, you asked to open the conversation. I'm completely aligned. You asked me at the beginning, part of the low rate of people working remotely is not due to the fact that they don't want to. It's also due to the fact that even in Europe, even in all the countries, although it's lower in Europe than in Africa, for instance, some people can't work remotely. So it explains a lot. Sure. And it shows how hard is the question if you begin to compare people together, begin to compare their tasks and what they actually do and how they can do that.
have you guys noticed in the other kind of sector, the sector that has to go into work every day? Have you noticed any massive changes or differences as a result of the rest of us being able kind of forcing it further down the line?
I mean, I think from my perspective, what I've seen is that it depends on which part of the business we are referring to. If we are just referring to workers and contextualize it around your workers, or if we look at it from a business perspective. So if we look at businesses, majority of the divisions within businesses that have benefited the most from the remote working environment are often your back office environments, such as finance, HR, and skills within the business that every business needs, but that isn't required on site necessarily. Where it has been more difficult to embrace the remote working environment is when you have manufacturing or operational staff that is obviously required on site. But I think that has been one of the benefits of this forced remote working, is to enable or to discover efficiencies within the structures. And I think that's maybe something you'll see within the co-working space, that or perhaps not in the co-working spaces, but that head offices, I believe, is going to change, because there's a lot that happens with the 6,000 head office staff that could be remote, but not necessarily the branch or site managers that will be able to go remotely. And having said that, even within those branch and site and operational environments, with the influx of technology, you've seen more operational efficiencies. And that, of course, brings up the next question, which I don't believe a future of work discussion will be complete without, is this concept of, will the robot take my job or save my company and create more jobs?
Sure.
So yeah, just leaving that one out there.
Yeah, I think to pick up on that, when you go back, like, what does a future of work discussion need to or have to entail? And I think for me, it's, going back, what are we trying to solve for? As we said earlier, we've sort of jumped into this remote work versus physical work, which is a very small part of the discussion. When I think about future of work, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the fact that if I look specifically at the African context, and I think of the huge issue, I was reading an African Development Bank report not too long ago, just looking at a couple of stats around what we need to solve for. We read, a lot of us look at pitch decks and reports around population growth, and it's glorified because we're going to have this huge consumer market and it's great. The problem is no one talks about the fact that we're going to have massive population growth and about 1 billion people in the working population who need jobs. So the first thing we need to solve for is, where are those jobs going to come from? Then we can start to talk about, well, what's better in terms of how we feel about our jobs? What's better in terms of the employer ensuring accountability and productivity? But step one is looking at where we're going as let's contextualize and talk about an African workforce and what jobs need to be created just to give people the security in the first place. What we do know, according to the World Economic Forum, is that I think it was 65% of kids who are entering school today will work in jobs that don't exist yet, right? So how are we creating an agile enough system that allows students and a youthful working population to have a job? Let's start with that.
Yeah, very valid points. I think, in Africa, we've seen, South Africa alone has, the official number is 50% unemployment. I'm pretty sure it's closer to 60, so 70. We've got a massive problem here with employment. And now the question is like, and I think it's across the whole of Africa, is that government is never going to meet the demand. So let me put it to you guys, like, what can private sector, what can SMEs, what do people do to be able to try and knock that dent, to try and actually, like, first and foremost, to your point, Rajiv, is get people into work?
I think a big piece of that puzzle is skills development. So one of the big pillars of the future of work is, obviously, if we have a better understanding of what kind of companies are being generated now and how they are structured, we can have a little bit of a view of what the mass workplace is going to look like 10, 15 years from now. And what kind of skills do those companies need? And I think this is where it becomes, and I really like what you've mentioned around the agility of it. And it's this agile skills development. I think another really interesting thing is even within the workplace, your skills that's important today may be completely irrelevant in as little as a year or 2 years from now. So how do we get that rapid skills development from an early stage done, and even more so in the youth and the unemployment sector? So perhaps that is something for the private sector, but also the public sector, of course. And then I think something SMEs and everyone can do is we're going to have to start focusing more and more on like on the job skills development, mentorship, learning as we go, and not just rely on tertiary educations or formal education systems.
Have you guys, thanks Ned, that's a valid point. I actually wanted to ask, so people listening can actually get some things to check out. Have you guys seen any amazing skills development apps, software, websites, motions, businesses, edutech companies, anything like that? That's kind of, for instance, I saw, obviously Google's done a whole bunch of things around helping people get certified with their various kind of product suites. There are a bunch of coding applications which have been coming out where you basically learn how to code, and once you get a job with a development house, you then start to pay it back. Have you guys seen any other things like that that have kind of really kind of taken track in Africa or the world?
Yeah, Patrick, yes, that's a good question. For us at Vivatech, for instance, through AfricArena, we actually are sourcing startups for the future of work issues. So it shows how, in a sense, of course, there are fabulous possibilities and startups that I've seen here in Europe, but we still are in need of new solutions because it's not done yet, you see, and it was addressed through the last words. I just like to add something to skills. I think it's all about skills, and I'm really aligned on that, but it's also about impact. There is a global shift worldwide, and not only in Europe, but also in all the continents regarding impact. What I mean by that is that at Vivatech, for instance, we do connect future of work to the notion of impact and tech for good, because we think that this future of work will be linked in the near future to better inclusion, meaning, for instance, women, minorities, and to several things, just like, for instance, environment, that are really connected to the capacity to do something that is positively impactful, and work will be more and more connected to that. And I think the new generation, especially, for instance, here in Europe, is really in attempt and in need to connect their work to their personal life, to inclusion, and to positive impact overall.
Totally. I think impact is becoming, I think what this whole pandemic has done is it's really made people question their values, both from a personal space and from an organizational perspective. And I think, I was reading also, to Rajiv's point, the future of work is I think a lot of people have gone, what does work mean? What is my purpose on this earth? And how do I want work to play a part of that? I think a lot of organizations and businesses and people are kind of going, is this the job for me? Is this a work environment for me? Is this truly what I want? A lot of people have been questioning, and it comes back to like, what is the impact that I want to make, on for my family or for the world around me? If I could ask each of you, and we'll start with you, Sean, is like somebody who's listening in who maybe has just lost their job, and or has been retrenched, or is unsure on, kind of half leave or whatever their situation is. Kind of what we've said is, what would you advise someone who wants to try find something or upskill or wants to change paths so that they make sure that they future-proof themselves for the next pandemic? Because let's be honest, I don't think these things are going away. And I think the future of work, like we've all discussed, is completely going to be out of our wildest dreams in the next 5 years and 10 years. It's accelerating at such a pace. What are some of the things that you would share, just kind of on your personal experience shares or learnings, that you think someone could really kind of think, grapple with, check out, look up, research, whatever, to maybe kind of make them future-proofed in their workspace going forward, or the future job that they may find?
Yeah. Well, look, I can speak from personal experience. It wasn't too long ago where I made a big switch in my own life and my own career from an investment banker working in London to something that I was more passionate about. And it took me a long time to find out what that passion was. And the only way you do that is through research and being inquisitive. So I guess the very first skill you have to be willing to embrace is being inquisitive. 20 years ago, or maybe a little bit more, 30 years ago, if you wanted to learn something, you were going to a library or you were going to a friend who was knowledgeable in the industry that you were looking at. Now it's really at our fingertips. And of course, I'm making a lot of assumptions here that people have access to those resources, but it doesn't take a lot to get there. And you really are able to research anything and everything these days. And I've done that throughout my career since shifting and pivoting. It's having an inquisitive nature, and then going down a route, and you'll very quickly find what you don't like, and you'll very quickly, hopefully, find what you do or are more inclined towards. And then it's a passion from inquisitiveness. It's a passion for knowledge, to seek out the things you don't understand. And you can be an introvert these days. You don't have to go out and knock on people's doors. The information is there. And you need to follow that passion. And definitely, even through this pandemic, where I myself, from a finance background, have been doing very basic coding and setting up systems that didn't exist in our organization before, partly out of necessity, but partly because as I started to do it, I found that it was something that interested me and I wanted to learn more and more about. And it speaks to productivity. You know, you can throw that all out the window. If you're doing something that's boring and bores you every day, you're going to spend 8 hours doing it and maybe achieve 1 hour productivity. Whereas once I jumped onto things I was learning and passionate about, I'd be working till 10 or 12 at night just to understand more and make more progress. And that is truly rewarding. So anyone who's looking at making a shift or a pivot needs to take a couple of minutes, maybe a couple of months, to reassess the situation and look back in their lives and identify what they didn't enjoy doing, and try to then guide themselves down a path that leads them to a more fulfilled career.
Awesome answer. Thanks, Sean. Anyone else want to add to that from personal experiences?
Well, not necessarily from personal experience, but I think for me, what stands out in those contexts is really recognizing the fact that we all have trade-offs. Every decision has a trade-off, and a lot of the time we don't want to acknowledge that or accept that. So so what do I mean by that is on the one hand we want to leverage technology, and we want to say that the future is tech and digital and software related. But then we refuse to acknowledge that we are still in an environment where 75% of the continent is offline, where we just don't have the skill set. So where do we start, right? On the one hand, we want to have that sort of work-life balance, and as an employer, we want to provide certain things. But then at the same time, we want to push accountability and productivity, which doesn't necessarily go hand in hand. So I think it's really recognizing what are the pros and cons and the trade-offs in what I'm looking to do going forward. Also just reading a recent report around what millennials and the youth coming into the working population are seeking, and a lot of that is having more alignment to the strategic direction of their employers. But then at the same time, it's the group of individuals who say they are constantly inundated with information, and they need to be able to process that better. So you can't really be closer to what's happening strategically if you don't want to receive the information. So it's really recognizing what's important to you and what you have the skill set to do today and what you have the agility to do in the future. But providing those natural constraints and parameters around your decision making, which a lot of us don't want to do.
Sure. Do you guys feel that it's necessary to take into consideration, kind of like you said, what was the stat you used? 65% of children will be in jobs that don't exist yet. It's like, how do you go about planning for something that you don't know what it's going to be? Because essentially you have to, if you're going to go deep into a skill, or obviously a lot of people jump around, but you kind of want to pick a path that is not going to have a dead end in a few years' time. Do you guys agree that you have to take that into consideration?
Yeah, definitely, Patrick, but you still have to connect it with education in general.
Sure.
I mean, even more when the skills that are necessary are not known yet through the jobs, because as you mentioned, the statistics are really clear about that. Let's show another statistics. For instance, we know that during the first quarantine worldwide, approximately 30% of the students didn't have access to any material, to anything, because they had no connection or no proper connection to the internet. When it comes to the sub-Saharan Africa, it's even 48% with logical, it's logic. It's enormous, and definitely we can connect basic knowledge and normal knowledge and superior knowledge to a real necessity. And it's now a wake-up call, I think, for us globally and also in Africa, to be able to connect all these students to knowledge, for them to be formed and then to be able to find the new jobs that will appear in the next 10 years.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I think it's so important that, I think businesses, the private sector essentially has to step up. You've got a lot of, obviously, innovation happening around, Starlink sending satellites in to try and connect places remotely. I mean, even where my folks live, we struggle with a decent connection. And it's such an important thing, is that if you want to have an inclusive if you want skills development, they've got to have access to the skills. There was a guy that we're chatting to yesterday on a crypto webinar who was a self-funded billionaire, and he's 21, and he taught himself how to code and how to through YouTube videos and how to trade through free YouTube videos. So the information is there, and I think, like you said, you're connecting with your purpose. But we've still got in Africa, to both your guys' points, is we've got a connectivity issue. We've got a and maybe it's a question of businesses trying to go, hey, I'm going to donate connectivity, I'm going to connect to community, I'm going to donate data, I'm going to, I think, a lot of the times we've got so many problems, you've got hunger and stuff, but I think maybe, like, on one end, it's around servicing connection, it's around servicing data, it's around how do you connect those dots, or connecting people to jobs or opportunities. I wanted to ask you guys, and just to kind of shift out of the obviously the challenges that are faced. We've seen a massive deurbanization. Cities, it's happening a lot in New York. Vincent, maybe it's happening a lot in Paris as well. I'm not sure on the stats on Cape Town. I mean, I feel like Cape Town is pretty remote as it is. What do you guys feel like it's happening with the movement out of cities? Do big cities have to worry? Big tourism boards, obviously travel's playing a massive part. Is travel going to come back like it was? This all plays a part in the future of work. Where do you guys think it's going to settle, or what have you noticed in that kind of space around deurbanization and the need to travel or travel less?
So maybe if I can comment briefly, I think Rajiv said earlier, one thing we can't avoid is population growth. Even if we had to do something about it now, it would be 50 years before we saw any kind of normalization. And the other thing we know about urban areas is, and I can only really speak of Cape Town and Johannesburg that I know well, but it's not sustainable to densify and densify and densify it. Especially in the likes of South Africa, where public transport itself is a difficult obstacle to overcome. So whether we like it or not, deurbanization will happen, and we can try as hard as we want to create low-income housing within urban areas. But I think that workplaces need to go to the employees and not the other way around. It's reached a point even in Cape Town where you're spending 3 hours a day in traffic, and it's probably not that much on a global scale, but people are tired of that. There needs to be some kind of a work style versus lifestyle payoff, where ultimately we need to create those jobs in a decentralized way.
Yeah.
Go for it, Dan.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, a couple of years back, I was involved with the Yes Foundation. So within the South African context, one of the very interesting things that they discovered through their research on youth unemployment was a step before the work even, people couldn't get to the interview. So even if they did have the skills and they were able to participate or even enter into the workplace, just the fact that, and I love how you've said it, that the work didn't come to them and they had to physically travel to the work was a big problem for them to even just enter the workplace. And then to put that sort of in parallel with more recently, I've come across a lot of businesses that have popped up and grown exponentially, such as letsdeal.com. And these are all businesses that focus on global employment. So obviously we all know that global employment has just gone up significantly as businesses have adjusted to a remote working culture more and more. And it was only natural that that was going to be the next step. And that opens up this beautiful thing of you are able to be employed anywhere in the world. And with services like Let's Deal, they enable companies to contract and employ within the correct compliance structures. So really dealing from Fortune 500 companies to small to medium enterprises to hire anywhere. So I think there's definitely some exciting opportunities happening by seeing the workforce in a more global context, not just within, like, whether it's urban areas or rural areas, but really looking at the world as a little bit more of a flat working space.
Anyone else get to chime in? Thanks, Annette.
Yeah, I think part of that is also coming back to this phrase, the trade-off, right? Where, as you say, deurbanization and our ability to make that work goes hand in hand with our ability to incorporate infrastructure and planning around that. So does a more decentralized system work for us in terms of transport, in terms of access to electricity and all of those sorts of things, which is in itself work to do, right? And so I think that's the sort of balance in terms of figuring out where we get to in a sweet spot, because I think there's a trade-off there where decentralization is almost inevitable, like you say, but the counter to that is to the point where it makes sense economically and environmentally, where we're starting to place certain constraints on our ability to completely decentralize.
Totally.
Yes, and almost everything was said, but if I can only add two things. First is to share you guys a funny statistics about the first quarantine here in Paris. It was announced just one day before it occurred. And you know, here in Paris, we are 2 million people. 28% of the population went off Paris in only one day, 28%. Wow. So maybe it shows, like you just said, Patrick, that maybe there is a big wish of, let's say, new life, deurbanization, new way of organization. But, and that's the second and last thing, it's all, of course, all connected to infrastructure. And more than infrastructure, something that I see here in Paris and more widely in Europe, is that smart city was not that, well, we knew the term, of course, we were discussing about it, but it was not center stage. You see what I mean? And now with this crisis, with this pandemic, I see it coming back, because it's all about that, how you organize a city, how you connect the cities together, how do you deurbanize correctly. So I think smart city is the next big thing.
Totally, it's a very valid point. And I think smart cities and smart suburbs, you know, I think what you'll find is like lots of micro cities popping up like an hour and a half outside of major cities, you know, or suburbs that kind of create kind of communities where there's, you know, they club together and they create infrastructures where smaller municipalities hopefully step up and create that kind of you know, that's kind of environment. I wanted to ask you guys, and I think this might be our wrap-up question, Katie, I don't know how we're doing for time, is we've discussed obviously a hang of a lot. So you guys are all running teams and engaging with businesses across the globe, at both large and small. What tips and tactics are, you know, have you guys learned that is working for you guys? So it could be something as small as, hey, we use WhatsApp predominantly as our communication thing, or we've actually moved on to Slack, or people time track with Harvest, or we have a stand up each morning at 8 o'clock, or we have a check-in call with the whole organization at 1 p.m. on a Friday just to say, how's it, or have a KIF weekend. What things have you guys noticed that, or either that you've implemented yourselves, or that you've seen people do, or that you heard that have really helped kind of just make a more enjoyable future of work for people in this new way of operating?
You said almost everything, Patrick, so it's difficult for us, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I tend to do that.
I think I'll go.
Yes, go for it.
I think two sides. On the one hand, So more on the philosophical side, so the softer side. Well, let's start with the tactical side. On the practical side, obviously we've embraced more automation. I mean, this is the most automated our business has ever run. And I mean, we're a software business, so we're already pretty automated. But every week, every day, things are just getting more and more automated. And in line with that was the embracing of this automation. So to really encourage the team to embrace this automation, to see the change as positive.
Was there a lot of resistance before, or what have you done differently?
Well, I think partly resistance, partly necessity. So maybe some resistance, like I don't really feel like change right now. And this is kind of what my second part of our drive has been, is to really just encourage the change, because partly change, partly I'm just too busy. You know, we've all been very busy. And one thing that we embraced now and that we're continuously encouraging is, well, firstly, to embrace change, and secondly, to not be so busy. You know, I think one of the things we really had to change in our environment was to define success differently. So in my previous management consulting life, the success was defined by how much you work. You know, if you showed up with your 18-hour workday, you were seen as successful and driven and ambitious. Now, if you show up with a bag full of adventures and things you achieved outside of the work environment, you're actually seen as successful. So I think the definition of success is a very personal thing, and it differs from person to person, but that's definitely something we've encouraged for people to define their own measure of success, and to not be defined by the previous, you know, industrial revolution definition of success. So those two things have played well together within our team.
Awesome. Changing the definition of success and embracing automation, and changing the mindset around the value that automation brings to the workplace and your life. Sean?
Look, I think you've mentioned a lot of the practical aspects. You know, I won't necessarily agree it's embracing it. It's more forced change, but with it ultimately a good outcome. You know, there's things that we've wanted to do in our business, like use Teams, and it just, time and time again, it was never embraced to that extent. And now we were forced to, and there was just no other way to operate. So we've been able to do that, and also get everyone in a way in a virtual community, which for lack of actually being physically available to each other was the next best thing we could see. Mm. And it has actually worked really, really well. And then the other tip or trick that I can perhaps suggest is, you know, we're all fighting for our little space on this planet, and fighting to breathe under difficult circumstances, fighting for our business's survival. But at the end of the day, we're all human, and we all deserve, to be sort of respected, to have relationships with each other. And one of the things I've been trying to instill within people in our organization, as well as our clients, is even in these difficult times, let's work with each other. Let's continue to communicate. Let's not try and one-up each other. It's difficult times, and we need to get through all of this together as best we can. So that would be the culture that I've been trying to embrace with all of our people and our clients, is keep communicating, and we will get through the difficult times.
Love that. Awesome. I think the more esoteric philosophical angle. Thank you for that, Sean. Appreciate it. Rajiv?
Yeah, just to pick up on what Sean was talking about, just taking that human perspective, and also to go back to what Annette was saying earlier around this singularity, or the concept of integrating as symbiotically as possible with machines. The reality is that there is only so much that we can process as human beings, and we need to go back to the human side. And I used the word transactional earlier. As things have become more transactional, our only ability to work as symbiotically as possible with machines, which again is inevitable, is by bringing in the empathy and the emotion and the ability to be human beings. So leverage what is our only competitive advantage. We don't have a problem with access to information anymore. Our problem is now to effectively filter. So if you're able to continuously learn, so nano degrees, for example, looking forward and going back to the education piece, there's no point in spending 5-10 years trying to perfect a skill that becomes redundant in 5 years. So, trying to remember and process as much as possible is not valuable anymore. but being agile and learning to leverage our competitive advantage as human beings, which is the emotion. It's the lack of that transactional behavior that makes us function the way we do. So yeah, that would be my takeaway.
Nice, love that. To move from transactions to transformational. Something like, hey, this is so right. It's very cool. I appreciate that. And Vincent, should we end with you?
Yeah, I'm really aligned with everything that was said, so I don't want to repeat too much. Maybe small tips, but it's really ongoing, you know. It's every week that we learn from that situation. And in Paris, as I mentioned in the introduction, we are locked down again, so we will learn even more during this second period. Let's say first tip is really to find a happy medium, strike a happy medium, happy balance between discipline and also personal life. So for instance, I never do meetings before 9 or during the lunch break or after 6. You know, it's simple, but you can do that. But at the same way I do that, I also say to my team, for instance, well, let's do 2 visio a week at 9 in the morning. It's a good enhancer. You can begin the day like this, you know? So it's a happy medium between the two things. And maybe the only second thing is, but it was already well said, stay tuned. So for instance, I asked my CI team, I said, if you think about 10 people you'd like to see during this period, but you can't because you don't do lunch, you don't go outside the apartment, who are these people? So they gave me the list and I said, okay, let's do a video with them during this moment, during the next 2 months. We have 1 hour with them. There is no like agenda or a specific thing to say, but it's more to share visions and see how we can advance together.
That's great. I love that. And has that have you noticed like really improved results as from that?
I was really amazed, Patrick, to be honest. The people that are answering, especially at the time, I'm working with VCs a lot here in Paris-based or London-based, and I have almost 100% of them answer my emails and want to do that, you know.
That's super cool. Great tips, guys. And it's a nice balance of like tactical, practical, everyday things to mindset stuff. Thank you, guys. I think we'll wrap up there. Thanks so much for all of your time. I really, really appreciate it. Annette, Sean, Rajiv, Vincent, thank you so much. Katie, thank you so much always for putting together the most amazing minds to talk about such great topics. Guys, future of work is something that's going to be talked about a lot with the AfricArena content. So be sure to keep following our channels. We've got a podcast on Spotify, and I'm sure we'll be diving deeper into this in the future. So yeah, thanks so much, guys. Have a kick-ass week, and we look forward to having you at the next one.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for your time.